Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking William Golding's chilling 1954 classic, Lord of the Flies. We're going to dive deep into this masterwork to really understand the savage potential that's, well, lurking inside us all. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the plot and the characters, just take a moment to picture that iconic, haunting imagery of a severed pig's head mounted on a sharpened spear. It's visceral, it's grotesque, and it forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. What actually happens when the comforting, everyday rules of civilization just vanish into thin air? So rather than giving you a standard textbook overview, we're going to jump right into that terrifying philosophical question. And we'll do it by framing this whole survival story against the violent history that inspired it. We really want to understand not just what these boys do on that deserted island, but exactly why they do it. Section 1. Context of conflict. The macrocosm of war. To truly grasp the horror unfolding on the island, we first need to understand the warring adult world these boys actually came from. You see, William Golding wasn't just guessing about human violence, he lived it. As a Royal Navy officer during World War II, he saw major conflicts firsthand, including the Normandy landings. We're talking about a war that claimed roughly 60 million lives. He saw exactly what people were capable of doing, not just the enemy, mind you, but the Allies too, who often justified absolute mass destruction in the name of morality. And on top of that realized trauma, he wrote this book during the early, incredibly tense days of the Cold War. The entire world was gripped by this ideological paranoia between the capitalist West and the communist Soviet Union, living under the very real, paralyzing threat of total nuclear annihilation. So Golding takes all of that immense, heavy, global anxiety and channels it into an allegory. He uses this incredibly simple setup. Just a bunch of schoolboys stranded on a pristine island after a plane crash. But everything here is symbolic. It all represents larger, terrifying historical truths about our civilizing conscience, battling it out against our brutal, destructive instincts. Section 2. Meet the Castaways, the microcosm of society. These British schoolboys act as living, breathing avatars for the different pillars of human society. First up, we have Ralph, who represents order and civilization. Then there's Jack, the head of the choir boys, who is all about authoritarianism and fierce ambition. We've got Piggy, pudgy, asthmatic, nearsighted, but representing deep intellect and rationality. Simon stands in for pure spirituality, empathy, and just natural goodness. And finally, Roger, who embodies sadism and completely unchecked cruelty. Now notice how the boys immediately try to replicate the adult world the second they land. They actually hold an election. But here's the kicker. They don't choose the experienced Jack or the highly intelligent Piggy. No, they elect Ralph simply because of his attractive size and the cool conch shell he happens to be holding. It's a remarkably superficial foundation for a society, which, let's be honest, we still see happening all around us today. At first, this whole network of relationships kind of balances out. You have Ralph right in the center trying to maintain order, relying on the wife Piggy for advice, while the kind-hearted Simon helps him build shelters and looks after the littler boys. These three act as a really vital moral counterweight to Jack and his aggressive choir boys, who, by the way, have immediately rebranded themselves as hunters. But if we zero in on this fatal dynamic between Ralph, Jack, and Roger, you can clearly see the conflict brewing. Jack directly opposes Ralph's democratic, rule-based approach. Jack just wants power, plain and simple. And hanging right there in the wings with Jack is Roger. Roger represents the sheer, escalating violence that blooms the minute there's no adult supervision. Remember early on when Roger throws stones at a younger boy? He deliberately misses because the invisible rules of his old civilized life are still holding him back. But as we know, those constraints absolutely won't last. Section 3. The descent into savagery, pacing the decline. This inevitable decline is officially triggered the moment Jack's choir boys strip off their black religious robes to become a primitive hunting pack. The tension rapidly turns into a bitter battle of ideologies. On one side, you have Ralph, desperately fighting to keep a signal fire going on the mountain, hoping for rescue, and practically begging the boys to build shelters. On the flip side, Jack exploits the boys' basic desires for meat and fun to build this authoritarian cult of personality. Eventually, Jack literally paints his face with clay, and that's a mask that, as Golding notes, frees him from shame, self-consciousness, and really just basic human decency. We can literally chart this terrifying chronological collapse. The ultimate turning point happens a few weeks in. Jack abandons his duty to watch the fire so he can go make his very first bloody pig kill. And in that exact moment, a rescue ship sails right past the island. But because the fire is dead, the ship just keeps on going. Ralph is absolutely furious, but Jack's hunters, they are so intoxicated by the bloodlust of the kill that they literally do not care. From there, Jock breaks away entirely to form his own savage tribe, and that leads to total disaster. This brilliantly illustrates the escalation of the story. The tension sharply spikes right through the rising action as Jack's hunters descend further and further into violence. They start chanting, "Kill the pig, cut her throat, spill her blood." This aggressive, totally destructive groupthink pushes us right to the absolute brink of the climax. Section 4. Unmasking the True Beast, the Internal Darkness. And that brings us to the psychological core of our explainer, the paralyzing, highly infectious fear of the beast. So the younger boys start having these nightmares about a snake thing or some kind of beast in the dark. Ralph tries to use logic, saying it doesn't exist. Piggy argues it's scientifically impossible. But then, a dead fighter pilot from the adult war raging way above the island parachutes onto the mountain in the middle of the night. The boys mistake this tangled, flapping corpse for a physical monster. It's a total illusion, of course, but Jack eagerly weaponizes this fear. He uses the threat of the beast to demand absolute loyalty from his terrified tribe, basically claiming he's the only one who can protect them. But our visionary, Simon, discovers the chilling truth. While wandering in the forest, he stumbles upon a severed pig's head that Jack's tribe left on a stick as a literal offering to the beast. Covered in swarming flies, this is it, the Lord of the Flies. Simon falls into this hallucinatory state where the head actually taunts him, and it confirms exactly what Simon already suspected. The beast isn't some animal with claws hiding in the jungle. It is human nature itself. The beast is the inherent evil lurking inside every single one of them. When Simon awakens from his faint, he discovers the dead parachutist and realizes the physical beast is just a harmless corpse. He immediately rushes down to the beach to share this massive realization with the others. But he arrives right in the middle of a massive thunderstorm, exactly as Jack's tribe is in the middle of a frenzied, savage hunting dance. Swept up in blind terror and absolute bloodlust, the boys mistake the crawling Simon for the beast itself. In the story's most tragic climax, they violently pounce on him and tear him apart. It's a brutal, senseless murder, and it completely cements the island's total surrender to savagery. Section 5. The final irony. The macrocosm returns. With pure goodness officially extinguished, the last remnants of logic and civilization are systematically hunted down. Piggy and Rolf are left out there essentially all alone. Jack's tribe goes ahead and steals Piggy's glasses, which is the only tool for making fire and really the island's ultimate symbol of rational sight. When Piggy bravely marches to Jack's fort, holding the conch shell to try and reason with them, we hit the final tragic turning point. Roger, now completely freed from absolutely all civilizing restraints, coldly dislodges a massive boulder. It strikes Piggy, killing him instantly, and simultaneously shatters the conch shell into 1,000 white fragments. In one single devastating moment, both the boy of intellect and the physical symbol of democratic order are entirely wiped out. Jack then orders a full-blown manhunt for Ralph, literally setting the entire jungle on fire just to smoke him out. Fleeing for his absolute life, Ralph bursts onto the beach and collapses in complete exhaustion. He looks up and sees a prim, proper British naval officer standing there. In a staggering twist of fate, the thick smoke from Jack's wildly destructive fire actually acted as a massive rescue signal, drawing in a passing warship. The officer looks down at these painted, filthy boys holding sharpened sticks, and he's deeply disappointed in their quote-unquote un-British behavior. Ralph just breaks down and begins to weep for the end of innocence and the profound darkness of man's heart. Which leaves us with Golding's ultimate bitter irony. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to consider this. Rolf and the boys are saved by a military officer from a heavily armed warship, right? But remember the context we talked about at the very beginning. That officer is actively engaged in a global war, an adult world that is currently tearing itself apart with atomic bombs and mass destruction. So we have to ask, are the boys really returning to a safe, civilized world? Or are they just stepping off a tiny, savage island onto a much larger one, proving that we can never truly escape the beast within? Thanks for exploring this with us.